Hello, everyone. My name is Betsy Dribbin. I'm head of advocacy for the Multifaith Alliance. We are an organization comprised of over 100 faith-based and civic groups in the US working on the Syrian crisis. Today, I am delighted to have joining with me Matthew LaCourte and Claire Holba, who are with the Niskanen Center, a prominent think tank in Washington, D.C. And the reason we have them with us today is our mutual interest in private resettlement of refugees. So without much further ado, I want to get started with both of them describing exactly what is private resettlement, and also to zero in on a federal program that started a little over a year ago called the WelcomeCorps, which puts federal energy, if you will, behind a robust private resettlement program. Thank you, Matthew and Claire, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Betsy. Really appreciate it. And thanks to the Multifaith Alliance for hosting this conversation. We're delighted to be here to talk about WelcomeCorps, the federal government's new private sponsorship program. We're going to dive in and get into the nitty-gritty on WelcomeCorps. But first, I'd like to just take a couple moments and talk about some recent history that has led us up to this point. So really, private sponsorship, this concept that you can get a group of people together to help sponsor a refugee that's currently outside of the United States. You can bring them to the U.S. and then help assist them in their transition to their new country. That idea in the U.S. really took off in about 2014, 2015, when the Syrian refugee crisis was getting a lot more attention in the United States. And there was a huge effort at that point to recognize the need, the necessity for the United States to take a larger role in protecting Syrian refugees. And really, there was this groundswell of support amongst communities all across the country, that if the federal government was not going to do something to help Syrians, that regular people wanted to step forward and do something, and if they could privately sponsor refugees, they should be given the option to do that. And so starting at that point in about 2015, a kind of coalition of groups and organizations, charities, foundations started to think more about what private sponsorship could look like in the United States. This is something that's existed in Canada for more than 40 years and has really taken off in many other countries in the last 10 years or so. Fast forward to the start of the Biden administration. President Biden put forth an executive order that essentially instructed the Department of State to stand up a private sponsorship program. And they issued a report. A couple of years went by. And then in 2023, in January 2023, the government launched the WelcomeCorps, which is this private sponsorship program. And through all of last year, the government gave the option to sponsor groups, to 5 people, to come together and sponsor a refugee that was already in what we call the refugee pipeline. So these are folks that they could be matched with that were going to enter the U.S. as refugees at some point in the next year or 2 years. And a group of 5 people, say the 3 of us on this call plus 2 other friends, if we were all in the same area, could come together and then help resettle that refugee ourselves. In December of last year, the government launched a kind of second phase of this, an expansion. And that was that if groups of 5 people got together, they could name a refugee that they know and then help bring them to the United States. So we're now at a place after 6 months or so of that program being in place, where almost 80,000 sponsors in the U.S. have come forward and applied. Tens of thousands more already in the process of applying, and we're seeing just a huge swell of interest in folks coming together to submit applications for named refugees. These are family members. These are friends. These are folks that people in the U.S. have studied with or done business with or have other pre-existing relationships. And so we're going to get into all the specifics about WelcomeCorps, how to get more involved here in this conversation. That was a little top line and a little history, but thanks again, Betsy, for this opportunity to talk about this really wonderful program.
Well, I want to get back to the Syrian side of things, since we have a mutual interest in that. There was 29,000 Syrians who were in the pipeline, I would say more than a year ago. And it was troubling to us that such small numbers were being resettled through the federal resettlement program. Much to our delight, the numbers have gone down appreciably. We're at the 16,000 mark, and that is a rather big chunk of Syrians who've been able to make it through the pipeline. Let's talk a little bit more about the Syrian side of things, because it was my understanding that while you could specifically name a name, you also can generically say, I would, or our group would like to host or resettle a Syrian without giving a specific name. Is that correct? And what would one do?
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Nancy. In multiple ways, if someone is interested in supporting or sponsoring a Syrian refugee, they can go about doing that. The first would be naming, as you mentioned, and maybe with naming, can almost kind of break that down into two categories. So one could be sponsoring someone that you know who maybe has an existing case number through the U.S. refugee admissions program. So their case has been inputted. It's starting to be processed in the pipeline. Where they're at could be various stages. So you could name someone, but indicate that U.S. refugee admissions number in your application. In addition to sponsoring someone you know, you can also be matched with someone through a matching application. And within that matching application, you can indicate you want to sponsor a household with a certain spoken language of a certain nationality, such as Syrian, or you can also indicate household composition. So say you really want to sponsor a family with children, you could indicate that as well in your application. WelcomeCorps tries to make the best possible match for the private sponsor group and the refugees based on those affinity criteria. But they definitely, of course, encourage sponsor groups to be open-minded and flexible about their preferences, knowing that it could maybe take some time to make the match with specific nationality or other indicating factors used in your application.
So right now, if you are out there and you're listening to this and you are interested and have a group of 4 others, group of 5 in total, and you are interested in sponsoring a Syrian refugee, you don't know any Syrian refugees, you would be able to put forth an application and communicate to the government that you are interested in a Syrian refugee or a Syrian family. Simultaneously, if you do know of a Syrian refugee, you have their name, you are able to input that information and say, I specifically want to sponsor this Syrian refugee. That goes beyond Syrians, as Claire was saying, but for those who are interested specifically in Syrian refugees, you are able to name that specific person. And that doesn't have to be a direct family member. It can be a family member, but it doesn't have to be. And so there really is a wide opportunity to get involved. And so, Betsy, you mentioned the 16,000 or so Syrians that are in the pipeline. Those refugees are going to be processed and will enter the U.S. Shortly within a you could probably expect less than a year and a half, something like that, to toss out a number. Those folks who are in the pipeline right now, if you wanted to come forward and say, I'm interested in matching with a Syrian refugee, those folks can come to your community through WelcomeCorps. And so there is really a magnificent opportunity that has been opened up, and the Multifaith Alliance and here at Niskanen, we're interested in helping folks work their way through that process.
Let's talk a little bit more about criteria, because you keep mentioning the magic number 5, at least 5. So for those watching this program, could you describe a bit more of beyond the enthusiasm, what else is needed to be both a host group and also a potential refugee? We talk about the pipeline, but of course, underscoring everything, a refugee must be registered. That is the leitmotif of everything. If the individual you want to sponsor is not registered, that is a challenge. So let's talk a little bit about the numbers, what you're expected to do. And while that's a bit of the nitty-gritty, and not to dampen the enthusiasm, it also helps to know a little bit of a reality check. What would be involved?
Yes. So first, starting with the sponsor group. So you're excited, you're enthusiastic, you're wanting to form a group and sponsor someone you maybe don't know or who you do know. So a couple basic eligibility requirements. Each member of the sponsor group does have to have either citizenship or be a legal permanent resident, a green card holder. Each group member must be over the 18 or older. And then each group member has to pass and submit a background check. There's a link on the WelcomeCorps website. They send you to a certain background check group. And so each group member must do that. And then each group member has to live in the same general geographic area, generally within a 50-mile radius. And the reason for that is because collectively, that sponsor group has to demonstrate that they have the capacity and the commitment to fulfill these core sponsorship responsibilities, right? Which are very intimately connected with knowing the community, knowing where resources in the community are, being there if the person you sponsor needs a late night trip to a hospital or whatever that might look like. And so the sponsor group, right, they're the experts of their community. They know that. And so when they're welcoming the refugee household, it's important that they're physically present. That's not to say that people in other states, other cities can't also support the refugee household being sponsored. Of course, you can do many things from a distance. You can do many things virtually. Financially, you could also contribute to the funds that are required to be raised by the sponsor group. So there are a variety of ways that even just outside that core group of 5 who needs to live in the same geographic area could still be involved. But at a minimum, 5 people, 18 years or older, green card holders or citizens from the same geographic area form the sponsor group.
Let's talk about financial responsibilities. Are there some responsibilities?
Yes. So each sponsor group collectively must raise $2,425 per refugee they are sponsoring. So say they're sponsoring a household of 4, it's a little under $10,000 that they must raise to be used exclusively for that family once they arrive to the US for that first several months, first 3 months of securing housing, food, those essential needs until that household is able to secure employment and start generating their own income. At the time of application, the sponsor group only has to demonstrate they have 60% of those funds before they can submit the application, and those can be raised in a variety of ways. And then they must secure the full 100% by the time the household arrives.
Does the federal government help at any point with any of the needs of that refugee or refugee family?
I think it's important to note that so each refugee coming through the program is eligible for the same social services benefits that any refugee coming through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program is eligible for. So it is the responsibility of the sponsor group to raise that $2,425. There are various resources on the WelcomeCorps website about fundraising tips, funds that are maybe available to support sponsor groups to do that. One question we get is the responsible is the sponsor group responsible for paying for airfare and booking and securing airfare for the refugee household. They are not. So airfare is covered and fronted and arranged overseas by the Resettlement Support Center or the relevant entities within the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. And when the refugee arrives after several months, it'll be their responsibility to start paying that money back. It's sort of a loan. This is done in the traditional reception and placement program. But it's important to note that the sponsor group does not cover and arrange that travel.
What about if, again, you're enthusiastic, you want to do this, and then you say, gee, I've never done anything like this. Is there training? Are there resources that once that family or individual shows up, if you hit snags, are there people who can be helpful beyond your colleagues who are part of the group?
There are so many resources out there. I really encourage, if you are interested and you want to learn more, to look at the WelcomeCorps website. There are application support sessions. You can attend them live. They occur every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. You can sign up. There's also an on-demand application support session. You can dig through the WelcomeCorps website. They have developed toolkits and budget worksheets and how to secure housing and how to even structure your sponsor group into various committees if you wanted. I mean, there are a lot of resources out there. And then additionally, you might also try to connect with what is called a private sponsorship organization. So these are organizations that are accredited within the WelcomeCorps program that provide support to private sponsor groups, maybe during the application process, or especially once a refugee household arrives. They are there to coach and mentor private sponsor groups to help them maybe know how to connect with different social services in their community. So in short, yes, a lot of resources out there.
So both you and Matthew have been involved in this for quite some time. I wonder if you could describe, for those watching, some of the surprises that both of you have found, both good surprises and challenging surprises in the private resettlement approach to refugee resettlement.
Yeah, I can start. I think something we hear all the time from folks who have been involved in sponsorship is, you feel like you want to do something for the world. You want to get involved. You maybe see harrowing scenes coming from places that are sending refugees, and you think, I am moved by the Syrian crisis or what is happening in Venezuela or Afghanistan or elsewhere, and you think, I have some ability, some means to help other people who are not as fortunate as I am, and I'm going to help out. And then after you go through this whole process, you meet a refugee family, you have this, formal engagement for 90 days, and then you're at the end of the kind of formal portion. And we just hear time and time again that people think, I was doing this to try to give something to somebody else, and really at the end of this experience, I have come away as a different person. I have been fulfilled in trying to assist my community, both locally getting involved and my global community around the world. And I think we just get this great story about folks who come together and a refugee family and a group here in the U.S. And by the end of their experience together, for the most part, they're like one big family. Just like beautiful American stories of people from different walks of life coming together. And I think we just see that time and time again. But I don't want to, make it seem like everything is perfect. And I think that there is, built-in support mechanisms to make sure that sponsors are rising to the occasion, that they are meeting the needs and the expectations of the refugee families themselves, and that there are safety nets in case of sponsorship situation that goes awry. I mean, this is a big commitment. We don't want to. This is not just you sign your name on a website and you write a check and you walk away. We want to be clear about setting expectations. This is a big commitment. But that is also part of the reason that we've seen in so many other countries the great success stories that come out of sponsorship, because you have to come together, your group, and then the people in your group and beyond who are involved more informally. And you have somebody whose uncle has a used car lot, and they are able to procure a car to help one of the refugees get to work. You have someone down the street in the neighborhood who is a retired school teacher who used to teach English, and maybe can help the youngsters learn English, or help them get enrolled in the local school. I mean, this is like a process, and it is kind of all in. And I think because of that experience, people walk away changed in a great way in their involvement in welcoming our newest neighbors to this country.
So two related questions. The first one is, if it's turning out to be a terrific success, can you sponsor more than one family at the same time? Do you need to wait? In other words, if you're finding it is terrific, how quickly can you step in again? That's the first part. And on the less happy side, and you touched on this very briefly, suppose the chemistry between the family and the group doesn't seem to be working out, and you did touch upon that. Not everyone is going to be a very good match. Sometimes the traumas that refugees have sustained in whether Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, or wherever they're coming from comes out in a variety of ways when they're able to finally land. They may have PTSD, there may be other issues, or it may simply not be the best chemistry, if you will, between the host and the refugee family. Could you describe both? If it's blissful, how do you do it again? And if it isn't blissful, what do you do?
Right. Well, maybe I'll start with having challenges. Relationships between humans can be messy and complicated in any situation, right?
True.
But so this is, one of the roles of a private sponsor organization. And so each sponsor group, when you go to apply in the application, you'll see one of the first questions is, are you working with a private sponsor organization? If not, then you will be matched with one. And so each sponsor group does have to submit 30 and 90-day reports, working with that PSO. The PSO has a responsibility to kind of monitor the relationship, provide some oversight, flag any challenges in the relationship between the sponsored individuals and the sponsor group. Of course, WelcomeCorps as well has these resources, but if as challenges arise, there are those supportive networks there to try to hopefully work it out. But if ultimately another sponsor group needs to be found, those groups are there to facilitate that. In the
before you get to that, if you don't mind, PSOs you mentioned and went on.
Yes.
I think our viewers, listeners might want to know a tad bit more. What is a PSO?
Yes, a PSO is a private sponsorship organization. And so right now there are about 25 of them nationally. And so these are nonprofit organizations that have gone through intense training with the WelcomeCorps team and leadership. And they're there as the guides, the mentors to private sponsor groups. So kind of intermediaries between WelcomeCorps and private sponsor groups. Not there with the responsibility to fulfill those core social services and responsibilities, but there to really just be that support, so private sponsor groups don't feel like they're on an island. And these are, some of them are pious, Catholic charities, I think Church World Service, so some very large well-known NGOs, but also some more small local ones. I think the YMCA, and I'm forgetting which city is one. Indianapolis has a couple, and so there's kind of a range of what these private sponsor organizations are, PSOs.
Thank you.
And Claire, I know you wanted to talk about the happy example.
Right, right.
But I'll just say quickly, I think this is a new program, right? The ability to name a refugee to sponsor, it only started in December of last year, right? We're 6 months in. But there is this enormous infrastructure that has already been built out. And so Claire is talking about some of that with the private sponsor organizations. It seems like each city or state or metropolitan area, there are groups who are more involved. Claire mentioned, there are weekly like live chats and kind of streaming conversations that take place that can help people answer questions. There's call-in lines, there's application support. There is a whole infrastructure here to support folks who think, well, I really want to get involved, but gee, this is quite an undertaking. The government and the community sponsorship hub, CSH, which operationalizes the WelcomeCorps, has put together resources and an infrastructure that is there to literally support the folks who think like, I'd love to do this, but man, I'm a little intimidated. Being intimidated is fine. There are folks to help you, walk through the application. You don't have to be a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Legalese worries me. Long applications worry me. There are folks, on the phone and over Zoom who are happy to walk you through some of that stuff. So if you're interested, reach out and get involved, and don't be worried about being shy or a little intimidated. People are there to help you walk through the process. And then once you click submit on an application, there's more resources to walk you through when the refugees that you're sponsoring are arriving and whatnot. That support continues all the way through.
So
Absolutely. I'll just add one more thing too.
Please.
I mean, you can book 15-minute one-on-one sessions with a WelcomeCorps coach. Those are readily available, and I mean, I've utilized them myself with different sponsor groups I'm working with, and they're great. You literally have one person there from the WelcomeCorps team to talk specifics about your application. So yeah, a ton of resources out there, and getting to the positive side of things, right? Which I think we anticipate much more relationships that are formed being healthy and going far beyond the 90-day minimum support period. If you sponsor someone and have this great experience and want to continue to do that, which I think we've found often happens, maybe you sponsored someone and they say, I have family. And so now you maybe initially did a matching application, then you sponsor someone I mean, there are so many stories of these in other countries and other case studies, right? You do have to wait 90 days after the first group you sponsor arrives before you can then apply to sponsor again.
And again, each member of that family has to be registered. Am I correct about that?
We can talk, yes, about some of the eligibility criteria for the person that you are wishing to sponsor. There, again, are a lot of resources on the WelcomeCorps website that go into detail about the eligibility criteria. I recommend people use the refugee eligibility tool. It puts you through a series of questions that you can answer based on the specific case of the person you want to sponsor, and you can find out if they're eligible or not. But essentially, some of the basic eligibility criteria are: the person you wish to sponsor must be 18 or older or coming with a parent or legal guardian. They must be outside of their country of nationality on or before September 30th of 2023. There are a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, it is outside of your country seeking asylum in another country on or before September 30th last year. And then the big point that you mentioned, Betsy, is the requirement to have proof of registration or POR. And that is registration either with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, or the host country where you are currently seeking asylum in as a refugee. That registration with the UNHCR does not have to be a full refugee status determination. There's a difference between refugee status determination, RSD, and just registration with the UNHCR entity. Again, we're getting a little bit into the weeds here.
Right.
There's a lot of resources on this. There are several countries. This time, a refugee needs to be in a country that the U.S. can go and process their application in and adjudicate their refugee claim. So several layers of eligibility criteria, but the registration, as you mentioned, Betsy, is a very, very important one.
So you've offered a very rich array of information that people can go back, because this is recorded. People can go back and drill down on parts that they might want to refocus on. But in closing, since you both have great experiences in this area, I'd like to open it to both of you to offer a bit more of your thinking of anything that you both think would be helpful to share about this program. You've given us a lot, but I wanted to give you a little bit more time, because I think there is vast enthusiasm, as both you and Matthew have indicated, but also a desire for more knowledge, or even just a bit of a better sense of what private sponsorship is. So I'd like to open it to both of you to say, is there anything either of you would like to add to assist our viewers?
So Matthew's comment that don't feel like you have to be an immigration lawyer, or don't feel like you're going to be left on an island. This is something that it's a serious commitment, but there is so much hope around it. There is so much excitement and enthusiasm. I get to work with sponsor groups every day, and the stories and the different people across diverse walks of life that are coming together to sponsor. I mean, it's just, I feel so proud that we have a program like this now in our country. And it's something that I just encourage people to utilize the resources out there, utilize those one-on-one sessions, and act now and move now to form a sponsor group and help someone to come here to safety and freedom. And I think I'll also emphasize one more thing, which is just the expansive and transformative potential of the WelcomeCorps. Any group in any or city or town across the country can choose to welcome someone, and it is driven by the community saying, we want you here, we want to bring you to safety, we want to bring you to freedom. Right now, about 230 welcoming our refugee cities across the country that participate in the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program through resettlement agencies, and WelcomeCorps just allows any city or town to be that. So I'll end there.
Matthew?
Yeah, I'll add that we are at the forefront of WelcomeCorps, and I'd like to think, in 2050, WelcomeCorps will just be a part of the immigration system, be a part of the U.S., and that there will be generations of folks who came through the WelcomeCorps, and then they turn around themselves as refugee families in the U.S., and then they welcome new refugees. I think it's something that can just become part of the fabric of the U.S. In some way. It already is, right? We have informal sponsorship where nobody's signing up anywhere, in all forms in our communities across this country. You look out for older folks in the neighborhood when it snows, or it takes a village to raise a child. And so the idea that Americans can now come forward, 5 to a group, fundraise some money, submit a plan, and then can help a refugee who escaped persecution in Syria. It's an amazing thing. I think we're going to see continued interest and ultimately great results for the outcomes of these refugees when they start arriving, and hopefully WelcomeCorps becomes part of the fabric of our country. So thanks again so much, Betsy and the Multifaith Alliance, for your work across the board in supporting Syrians, and we look forward. We are open and available to chat with any folks who are interested, and so please, you can email me or Claire at the Niskanen Center. You can reach out to the good folks over at WelcomeCorps and log on to their website for any answers, or reach out to your contacts at the Multifaith Alliance, and we'll make some connections. But the support system is there, and get on the ground floor of WelcomeCorps, and you'll be able to say, I was one of the first. I was one of the first couple thousand sponsor groups that welcomed refugees through the program. So thanks again, Betsy.
Thank you both so much. I know the Multifaith Alliance, which has been working on the Syrian crisis from the beginning, is so thrilled that there is a program where refugees not only can be resettled, but communities can benefit from the talents, the energy, and the abilities of refugees. So I will close this, and thank you both again, and thank Niskanen Center. We hope you have the resources going forward. We've given you some information and some ways to get additional material, and we hope you join the WelcomeCorps effort to ensure private resettlement of refugees. Thank you.